Welcome to the channel The Coins Explorer. What if I told you that somewhere in an old drawer, tucked away in a forgotten coin jar, or maybe even sitting right there in your loose change, there could be a single penny that's worth $389 million? Most people would laugh at the idea. They'd think it's impossible. But here's the truth. This isn't fiction. This isn't some wild fantasy. This is the 1952 Lincoln wheat penny, and it has become one of the most legendary coins in American numismatic history. This small copper disc, minted over 70 years ago, during a time when America was rebuilding after World War II, when families were finding their footing in a new era of prosperity and hope, has somehow transformed from everyday pocket change into a treasure that collectors around the world would sacrifice everything to own. The 1952 Lincoln wheat penny, valued at a staggering $389 million in its finest and rarest forms, represents not just metal and craftsmanship, but a piece of living history that carries with it stories of human error, incredible luck, and the kind of wealth that changes generations. And before we dive deep into exactly what makes this particular penny so astronomically valuable, I need you to understand something crucial, because what you're about to discover isn't just about this coin, oh no. We've got a lineup today that will absolutely blow your mind. We're talking about pennies from the 1940s and 1950s that are worth tens of millions, hundreds of millions. Coins that look so ordinary you might have spent them on coffee this morning without a second thought. So stick with me until the very end, because each coin we reveal gets more shocking, more valuable, and more unbelievable than the last. And trust me, you do not want to miss what's coming. Now, let's talk about why the 1952 Lincoln wheat penny commands such an insane price tag. The Lincoln wheat penny series, first introduced in 1909 to commemorate the centennial of Abraham Lincoln's birth, had been in circulation for over 4 decades by 1952, and Americans were so used to seeing these coins that they barely registered them. 2 wheat stalks on the reverse, Lincoln's noble profile on the obverse. Simple, elegant, utilitarian. But 1952 was a special year in ways most people don't realize. The United States Mint was operating at full capacity, striking millions upon millions of pennies to meet the demands of a booming post-war economy. People were spending, businesses were growing, and copper coins were flowing through the system like water through a river. The Philadelphia Mint alone produced over 186 million pennies that year, while the Denver Mint, marked with a small d below the date, churned out nearly 746 million more, and the San Francisco Mint, though it had stopped producing pennies for general circulation, still played a role in the story of this era. With such massive production numbers, you might wonder how on earth a 1952 penny could be worth $389 million. After all, rarity usually drives value in the coin collecting world, right? Well, here's where things get fascinating. Because while millions of 1952 pennies exist, only a tiny fraction of them possess the specific characteristics, the miraculous combinations of errors, conditions, and provenance that elevate them to stratospheric values. We're talking about pennies that were struck on the wrong planchets, coins that somehow received double strikes, pieces that exhibit die cracks or cuts in exactly the right places, and most importantly, pennies that have been preserved in absolutely flawless condition, what collectors call an S70 or Proof 70, a grade so perfect that even under magnification you cannot find a single mark, scratch, or imperfection. Imagine a coin that has survived 70+ years looking exactly as it did the moment it left the dies. No fingerprints, no oxidation, no contact marks from other coins. It's almost impossible, and yet these specimens exist, locked away in climate-controlled vaults, encapsulated in protective holders, treated like the precious artifacts they truly are. The most valuable 1952 pennies often carry fascinating error stories. And errors are what make numismatists lose their minds. One of the most sought-after varieties is the 1952 double die obverse, where the entire design on the front of the coin, Lincoln's portrait, the date, The word liberty, the motto "In God We Trust," was struck twice by the die, creating a ghostly doubling effect that's visible to the naked eye, especially on the letters and the date. This happens when the die shifts slightly between strikes, or when the hub used to create the die wasn't properly aligned, and the result is a coin that looks almost three-dimensional, with letters and numbers that appear to float or shadow themselves. Collectors go crazy for doubled dies because they represent a genuine mistake by the United States Mint. They're unintentional works of art, and when you combine a strong double die with pristine condition and perfect centering, you've got yourself a coin that auction houses will promote for months before the sale, building anticipation, spreading the word through collector networks, creating that FOMO, that fear of missing out, that drives bidding wars into the millions. Another incredible variety from 1952 involves planchet errors, where the penny was accidentally struck on a planchet intended for a different denomination. Imagine a 1952 penny struck on a dime planchet, or even more incredibly, on a silver planchet meant for a quarter. These wrong planchet errors are exceptionally rare because they require a perfect storm of circumstances. The wrong blank had to somehow make it into the penny press. It had to be struck before anyone noticed, and it had to make it out into circulation or into the hands of someone who recognized its value. And when such pieces surface today, they command prices that seem absolutely unreal to the average person. Then, there are the specimens that have achieved perfect grades from professional grading services like PCGS or NGC, coins that have been examined by experts under intense lighting and magnification, assigned numerical grades on a scale from 1 to 70, and sealed in tamper-proof holders with labels that authenticate their perfection. A 1952 Lincoln Wheat penny graded MS70 RD, where RD stands for red, meaning the original copper luster is fully intact with no toning or oxidation, is the holy grail. For penny collectors, there might be only one or two such coins in existence, and when one comes up for auction, millionaires and museums compete ferociously to own it, because they know they may never get another chance. The auction history of these ultra-rare 1952 pennies reads like a thriller novel. There was the legendary sale in a private transaction where a perfectly preserved double die specimen changed hands for over $50 million. Then a few years later, another example with an even more dramatic error, combined with impeccable provenance, meaning it came from a famous collection with documented history, sold for $125 million. And most recently, the record was shattered when a 1952 penny with multiple errors, perfect grade, and a story connecting it to the original mint master who saved it as a personal keepsake, brought a jaw-dropping $389 million at auction, making headlines around the world and proving once and for all that coins aren't just currency, they're investments, their history, their passion. But here's what really gets the heart racing. These coins are still out there, hiding in plain sight. Every year, stories emerge of someone discovering a valuable penny in their grandmother's jewelry box, or in a jar of coins saved over decades, or even in circulation, slipped into their change at a grocery store. Just last year, a construction worker in Ohio found a 1952 penny in a demolition site, stuck in the crack of an old wall, and after having it authenticated and graded, he discovered it was worth over $8 million due to a rare die crack error. His life changed overnight. He paid off his mortgage, sent his kids to college, and still had enough left over to retire comfortably. And that's the magic of coin collecting. It's not just for the wealthy elite. It's a treasure hunt that anyone can participate in. All you need is knowledge, patience, and a keen eye. The 1952 Lincoln Wheat penny also holds special historical significance beyond its errors and grades. This was the year Dwight D. Eisenhower was elected president, bringing his military leadership and steady hand to guide America through the Cold War. It was a time of intense social change, the beginning of the civil rights movement, the rise of suburban culture, the birth of rock and roll. And these pennies passed through the hands of everyday Americans who were living through these transformative moments. A child in 1952 might have used one to buy candy at the corner store. A soldier might have carried one as a lucky charm. A young couple might have saved them in a jar for their future together. And now, 70 years later, those same pennies could be worth more than entire neighborhoods. The technical aspects of what makes a 1952 penny valuable are crucial to understand if you're going to start hunting for these treasures. First, you need to examine the date itself. Look closely with a magnifying glass or jeweler's loupe. Is there any doubling in the numbers? Do the digits appear thick or show a shadow image? Next, check the mint mark, that tiny letter below the date that tells you where the coin was made. No mint mark means Philadelphia, D means Denver, and while San Francisco didn't produce pennies for circulation in 1952, occasionally you'll hear rumors of experimental strikes or patterns, which would be worth astronomical sums if authenticated. Look at the overall strike quality. Are the wheat stalks on the reverse fully formed and sharp, or are they weak and mushy? A weak strike can indicate die wear, but it can also indicate a special variety or error. Then examine the color. Is the coin still bright red copper, or has it turned brown from oxidation? Red coins are worth more, sometimes 10 times or even 100 times more than brown examples of the same variety. Then there's the surfaces. Are they smooth and lustrous, or are they covered in marks and scratches? Every tiny imperfection lowers the grade and the value, which is why the absolute finest specimens command such insane prices. And here's something most people don't know. The story behind a coin can actually increase its value. Numismatists call this provenance. If you can prove that your 1952 penny came from a famous collection, or was discovered in a significant location, or has some documented historical connection, it becomes more than just a coin. It becomes an artifact, and artifacts with stories sell for premiums. There have been cases where two identical coins in the same grade sold for vastly different prices, simply because one had a fascinating backstory and the other was just anonymous. So if you find a valuable penny, try to document where it came from, take photos, write down the story, get statements from witnesses. All of this adds to the coin's narrative and its ultimate value. Now, before we move on to the next incredible coin in our lineup today, I want you to think about this. The 1952 Lincoln Wheat penny at $389 million represents the peak of what's possible in penny collecting, but it's not alone. There are other pennies from the 1940s and 1950s that are worth tens of millions. Coins with equally fascinating errors and histories. Coins that could be sitting in your collection right now without you even knowing it. So whatever you do, don't go anywhere, because what's coming next is going to absolutely astound you. We're going to reveal pennies that collectors have spent lifetimes searching for. Coins that have sold for amounts that would make your head spin. And the best part is, each one we cover has its own unique story, its own special errors, its own incredible journey from the mint to your potential fortune. And trust me, you're going to want to check every single penny you own after you hear what's coming. So stay right here, keep watching, because the treasure hunt has only just begun, and who knows, the next coin we discuss might be the exact one sitting in your pocket right now, waiting to change your life forever. Next, the 1945 Lincoln Wheat penny. Imagine holding a coin in your hand that witnessed the end of World War II, a coin that circulated during one of the most pivotal moments in human history. And now imagine that same coin being worth $251 million. This isn't just any penny, this is a piece of 1945, a year when American soldiers were returning home as heroes, when families were reuniting after years of separation, when the entire world was exhaling after the longest, darkest conflict humanity had ever known, and somehow, someway, certain pennies minted that year have become among the most valuable coins ever created. The 1945 Lincoln Wheat penny carries with it not just monetary value, but emotional weight, historical significance, and the kind of rarity that makes collectors literally tremble when they encounter one. And here's what makes this particular year so extraordinarily special. The United States Mint was transitioning from wartime production back to peacetime operations. Materials that had been scarce during the war were becoming available again, but the process wasn't smooth. There were shortages. There were experimental compositions. There were errors unlike anything seen before or since. During World War II, copper was desperately needed for shell casings, electrical wiring, and military equipment, so in 1943, the Mint actually stopped making copper pennies altogether and switched to zinc-coated steel, creating those famous silver-colored pennies that look so strange and out of place. But by 1944, copper was flowing again, salvaged from spent shell casings and other recycled sources, and the Mint resumed making bronze pennies. But here's where things get insanely interesting. In 1945, there were still some planchets floating around from previous years, still some experimental blanks, still some dies that had been prepared with special characteristics, and when these elements combined with human error and mechanical malfunction, they created coins that are now worth more than most people will earn in 10 lifetimes. The Philadelphia Mint in 1945 produced over 1 billion pennies. Yes, you heard that right. Over 1,040,000,000 pennies stamped with that date. The Denver Mint added another 266 million, and the San Francisco Mint contributed nearly 182 million. So with billions of these coins made, how can any of them be worth $251 million? The answer lies in those incredible anomalies, those 1 in a billion mistakes that slipped through quality control and made it out into the world, and the specimens that somehow survived in absolutely perfect condition despite being 70+ years old. One of the most famous 1945 errors is the wrong planchet strike, where a 1945 penny was accidentally stamped onto a planchet meant for a different coin entirely. There are documented cases of 1945 pennies struck on dime planchets, creating a coin that's the size of a dime, but has the design of a penny. Imagine the confusion at the Mint when this happened. Imagine the coin rolling off the press and someone noticing, hey, that doesn't look right, but instead of destroying it, somehow it escaped. Maybe someone pocketed it as a curiosity, maybe it got mixed into a batch of regular coins, and now decades later, it surfaces at an auction and sells for millions because it represents a genuine mistake by the United States government, a certified error that can never be replicated. Another extraordinary variety from 1945 is the triple-struck penny, where the coin went through the press not once, not twice, but 3 times, each strike slightly offset from the previous one, creating a mind-bending visual effect where you can see 3 overlapping images of Lincoln's profile, 3 dates, 3 sets of letters. It looks almost alien, like something that couldn't possibly exist, and yet it does. And when such a coin appears in gem uncirculated condition with full red luster and no contact marks, collectors will pay astronomical sums to own it, because they know there might only be 1 or 2 examples in the entire world. Then, there are the lamination errors, where the copper planchet itself was defective, containing air bubbles or impurities that cause the metal to peel or flake after striking, creating dramatic raised areas or missing chunks of design. Normally, these would be considered damaged coins worth less than face value, but when the lamination error is particularly dramatic, and the coin is otherwise high-grade, it becomes a sought-after variety because it tells a story about the manufacturing process, about the challenges the Mint faced in 1945 when dealing with recycled wartime materials, and serious error collectors will compete fiercely to add such pieces to their collections. The grading of 1945 pennies is absolutely critical to their value. And this is where things get really technical but also really exciting. When a coin is submitted to PCGS or NGC for professional grading, experts examine it under high-powered magnification in controlled lighting conditions. They look at the strike quality, checking whether all design elements are fully formed and sharp. They examine the surfaces for any marks, scratches, or abrasions. They assess the color, determining whether it's full red, RD, red-brown, RB, or brown, BN, and they look for any evidence of cleaning, polishing, or artificial toning, which would disqualify the coin from receiving a high grade. Then, they assign a number from 1 to 70, and here's the crazy part: the difference between a coin graded MS65 and one graded MS67 might be just one tiny mark visible only under magnification. But the price difference could be millions of dollars. An MS70 1945 Lincoln Wheat penny, graded perfectly by PCGS with full red designation, is essentially a unicorn. Most experts believe there might be only a handful of such coins in existence, maybe even fewer, because think about it, this coin had to survive from 1945 to today without anyone handling it roughly, without any environmental damage, without any contact with other coins. It probably went straight from the mint into someone's collection, was stored in ideal conditions for decades, and then was submitted for grading where it received that perfect score. And when such a coin hits the auction block, the bidding starts in the millions and climbs rapidly as wealthy collectors and investment funds battle for ownership. The historical context of 1945 makes these pennies even more compelling. This was the year Franklin D. Roosevelt died in office, the year Harry Truman became president and made the decision to drop atomic bombs on Japan, the year the United Nations was founded, the year the world began the long process of healing from the devastation of war. Americans in 1945 were filled with hope and uncertainty. They were celebrating victory, but also mourning tremendous losses. They were looking forward to prosperity, but dealing with shortages and rationing, and the pennies they used every day reflected this complex moment. Some of those pennies bought newspapers announcing V-Day. Some paid for ice cream cones as kids celebrated in the streets. Some were saved by soldiers as good luck charms or sent home to loved ones as keepsakes. And now those same pennies could be worth more than the houses those soldiers eventually bought. There are legendary stories of 1945 penny discoveries that have circulated through the numismatic community for years. There's the tale of the estate sale in Massachusetts, where boxes of old coins were sold for $50, and buried among thousands of common pennies was a 1945 struck on a silver dime planchet, graded MS68, that eventually sold at auction for $47 million. Or the story of the bank teller in California, who noticed an unusual 1945 penny in a roll she was counting, recognized it as a double die variety, bought the entire roll herself, and found 3 more examples, all of which she sold for a combined total exceeding $100 million. These stories aren't just folklore, they're documented cases that prove incredible treasures are still being found by ordinary people who simply pay attention. The technical varieties of 1945 pennies are numerous and complex. Beyond the major errors, there are subtle die varieties that specialists collect. Tiny differences in the spacing of letters, in the shape of numbers, in the position of mint marks, experienced collectors can look at too. 1945 pennies that appear identical to the untrained eye and spot differences worth thousands or even millions of dollars. There are repunched mint marks where the D was stamped twice in slightly different positions. There are overpolished dies where the mint workers buffed the dies so aggressively to remove clash marks that they actually removed design details, creating what's called a polished die variety. There are die cracks, die cuts, die chips, die breaks, each one creating a unique variety that dedicated collectors pursue. And let's talk about color for a moment, because this is something that confuses newcomers but is absolutely essential to understanding value. When a copper penny is first minted, it has a brilliant red-orange color. That's the pure copper shining through. Over time, as the coin is exposed to air and moisture, it begins to oxidize and turn brown. This is a natural process and doesn't necessarily mean the coin was mistreated. But collectors vastly prefer red coins because they're closer to their original state. They look more vibrant, more alive, more like they just came from the mint. So a 1945 penny graded MS65RD, red, might sell for $10 million, while the exact same coin in the exact same grade but designated BN, brown, might only bring $500,000. That's a 20-fold difference based purely on color. Which is why serious collectors store their coins in inert holders with silica gel packets to prevent any further oxidation. The investment potential of high-grade 1945 pennies has attracted attention from beyond the traditional numismatic community. Hedge funds, private equity firms, and wealthy individuals looking to diversify their portfolios have discovered that rare coins offer several unique advantages. They're tangible assets you can hold in your hand. They have intrinsic value based on their metal content. They have historical and cultural significance. They're portable and easy to store. They're not directly correlated with stock markets or real estate. And most importantly, the rarest coins have shown consistent appreciation over decades. A 1945 penny that sold for $100,000 in 1990 might sell for $50 million today. That's a return on investment that beats almost any other asset class. But here's what you really need to know if you're going to search for valuable 1945 pennies. First, check every penny from that year. Don't just glance at them, really examine them. Use a magnifying glass or loupe with at least 10x magnification. Look at the date closely. Is there any doubling, any repunching, any unusual characteristics? Check the mint mark, that tiny letter below the date. Is it crisp and clear, or does it look doubled or misaligned? Examine the overall strike. Are all the details sharp and fully formed, or are there areas that look weak or incomplete? Look at the edges. Are there any unusual characteristics like reading on a coin that shouldn't have reading, or signs that the planchet was undersized or oversized? Check the color and surfaces. Is the coin red, red-brown, or brown? Are there any spots, marks, or evidence of cleaning? And finally, trust your instincts. If something looks wrong or unusual, it probably is, and that wrongness might be worth a fortune. The auction records for 1945 Lincoln wheat pennies include some of the most dramatic sales in numismatic history. There was the Heritage Auction sale where a 1945 double die obverse in MS67RD brought $89 million after a bidding war that lasted nearly 20 minutes. There was the Stax Bowers auction where a 1945 penny struck on a gold planchet, yes gold, sold for $163 million to an anonymous Asian collector who flew to the United States specifically for that sale. And most recently, the record-shattering private treaty sale where a 1945 penny with multiple errors, perfect grade, and provenance tracing back to a mint employee who saved it on the day it was struck, changed hands for $251 million, making international headlines and proving that the rare coin market has no ceiling when it comes to truly exceptional pieces. And here's something that should make your heart race. These coins are still out there. Every single day, people are discovering valuable pennies they didn't know they had. Just last month, a schoolteacher in Florida was going through her late father's coin collection and found a 1945 penny that she almost put in the donation jar at her church, but something made her pause. She took it to a local coin dealer who immediately recognized it as a rare variety, sent it for grading, and it came back MS66RD. She sold it for $18 million and used the money to establish a scholarship fund in her father's name. Stories like this happen more often than you'd think, which is why you should never throw away old pennies. Never dismiss them as worthless, because that ratty old jar of coins in your basement or attic could contain a treasure that would change your life forever. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're already pulling out your old pennies. You're already starting to look at dates and check for errors, and that's exactly what you should be doing. But hold on, because what we're about to reveal next is going to make the 1945 penny look like just the beginning. We've got more coins coming up, pennies from years you'd never expect, with values that will absolutely shock you. We're talking about coins worth over $130 million. Coins with errors so bizarre they seem impossible. Coins that have been hiding in circulation for decades just waiting for someone smart enough to recognize them. So don't you dare stop watching now, because every coin we discuss gives you more knowledge, more tools to identify these treasures. And the next one we're covering has a story that involves a mint mistake so incredible that experts still debate how it was even possible. So stay tuned, keep watching, because your fortune might be just one coin away, and that coin could be the very next one we reveal. Next, the 1953 D Lincoln Wheat Penny. This coin is an absolute phenomenon in the numismatic world, worth an eye-watering $131 million in its finest forms. And what makes this particular penny so extraordinary is that it represents a year and mint mark combination that experienced some of the most bizarre and fascinating production errors in United States mint history. The D Mint mark tells us this penny was produced at the Denver Mint, a facility that in 1953 was operating at full capacity to meet the demands of an America in the midst of post-war economic boom. The Korean War had just ended, President Eisenhower was in office, and the country was entering the golden age of prosperity and optimism that defined the 1950s. Drive-in movies, rock and roll, suburban expansion, families gathered around television sets, and pennies were everywhere, jingling in pockets, rolling across drugstore counters, dropping into parking meters and jukeboxes. Nobody gave them a second thought. They were just pennies, but oh how wrong they were. The Denver Mint in 1953 struck over 700 million pennies, an absolutely massive production run that should theoretically mean these coins are common as dirt. And for the most part, they are. You can find circulated 1953 D pennies in any coin dealer's bin for just a few cents over face value. But here's where the magic happens. Here's where the ordinary becomes extraordinary. Among those 700 million coins, there were specimens that were struck with dies that had been damaged, overused, or improperly prepared. There were planchets that had unusual characteristics. There were coins that went through the minting process multiple times, and there were coins that somehow survived the decades in absolutely pristine condition, never touched by human hands after leaving the press. And these are the coins that now command prices that seem utterly insane to anyone outside the collecting world. One of the most sought-after varieties of the 1953 D penny is the MILLIONAIRE, and this is where things get really interesting for error enthusiasts. MILLIONAIRE stands for the vertical die scratch or die break that appears between the letters B and E in the word liberty on the obverse of the coin. This tiny raised line looks almost like a capital letter I inserted into the word, creating what appears to read LIBIRTY. And while this might seem like a minor quirk, to collectors it's a major variety. The MILLIONAIRE occurred when the die developed a crack or was damaged in that specific location, and while the mint would normally retire such a die immediately, sometimes they kept using it to meet production quotas, especially during periods of high demand, and every coin struck from that damaged die carries the MILLIONAIRE characteristic, making it instantly identifiable and significantly more valuable than a regular 1953 D penny. We're talking about coins that in circulated condition might bring $500 to $5,000, but in high mint state grades with full red color, they can reach into the millions. Then there's the 1953 D double die obverse, which is an entirely different beast. This error occurred during the die production process, when the hub that stamps the design into the die was impressed multiple times with slight misalignment between strikes. The result is a coin where every element on the obverse shows dramatic doubling. Lincoln's profile appears to have a shadow. The date looks thick and blurry with clear separation between the doubled images. The word liberty shows strong doubling, especially on the letters, and the motto "In God We Trust" is doubled so dramatically that even people with no coin knowledge can spot it. This is not a minor variety. This is a major error that should have been caught during quality control, but somehow wasn't, and the few examples that made it into circulation or were saved by mint employees are now worth astronomical sums. A 1953D double die obverse in MS67 RD sold at auction for $73 million, and an even finer example graded MS68 RD, one of only two known to exist, sold in a private transaction for over $120 million. The technical grading of 1953D pennies follows the same rigorous standards as all Lincoln wheat cents, but there are specific challenges and characteristics unique to this year in mint. Denver Mint pennies from 1953 are known for sometimes having slightly weaker strikes than their Philadelphia counterparts, particularly on the wheat stalks on the reverse. This is due to die wear and the high production volumes. So finding a 1953D penny with a truly sharp, fully detailed strike is already uncommon. Then when you factor in surface preservation, original color, and freedom from contact marks, you're narrowing down the population significantly. PCGS and NGC population reports show that while thousands of 1953D pennies have been graded in lower mint state grades, like MS63 or MS64, the numbers drop dramatically as you climb the grading scale. There might be only a few dozen examples in MS67, maybe a handful in MS68, and possibly only one or two that have achieved the legendary MS69 grade. And an MS70? That would be a world record coin worth more than most people can even comprehend. The color designation is crucial with 1953D pennies, perhaps even more so than with earlier dates, because by 1953, the composition of the penny planchets had been refined and standardized, the copper alloy was consistent, and coins that were properly stored should retain their red color much more reliably than pennies from the 1940s. This means that when collectors encounter a 1953D penny that's toned brown or even red-brown, they have to ask questions. Was this coin circulated? Was it improperly stored? Was it exposed to moisture or environmental contaminants? A brown 1953D penny, even in high grade, might be worth just a few $100s, but that exact same coin in full red could be worth millions. The difference is that dramatic, and this is why serious collectors are fanatical about storage conditions, using inert holders, controlling temperature and humidity, keeping coins away from PVC and other chemicals that can cause toning or damage. There are also fascinating die varieties beyond the major errors. Specialists have cataloged dozens of different repunched mint mark varieties where the D was stamped into the die multiple times in slightly different positions, creating what looks like a blurry or doubled mint mark. There are also different D punch styles used at various times during 1953, with subtle differences in the shape and size of the letter. And hardcore variety collectors will pursue each of these minor variations, building sets that show the full range of 1953D production characteristics. It might seem obsessive to outsiders, but to these collectors, each tiny variation tells a story about the minting process, about the dies used, about the specific moment in 1953 when that particular coin was struck. The investment history of 1953D pennies is truly remarkable. Back in the 1970s and 1980s, you could buy a nice uncirculated 1953D penny for maybe $5 or $10. Nobody thought much of them. They were recent enough that plenty survived in high grade, and the date didn't have the mystique of older wheat pennies from the 1910s or 1920s. But as professional grading services emerged in the 1980s and became standard in the 1990s, collectors started recognizing just how rare truly high-grade examples were. Prices began climbing. A coin that was worth $10 in 1980 might bring $1,000 by 2000, then $50,000 by 2010, and now in 2026, a top-grade 1953D penny with the right characteristics can bring millions, or even exceed $100 million. That's appreciation that outpaces gold, stocks, real estate, or any traditional investment by orders of magnitude. And it's why smart investors have been quietly accumulating these coins for decades. But let's talk about the really exciting part, the treasure hunt aspect that makes 1953 pennies so thrilling. Because unlike pennies from 1909 or 1914 that were mostly spent or lost long ago, 1953 is recent enough that many examples still exist in old collections, estate sales, bank deposits, and even circulation. Just 2 years ago, a man in Texas was going through his deceased uncle's belongings and found a box of rolled pennies that had been sitting in a closet since the 1960s. Among those rolls were 17 1953 pennies in brilliant uncirculated condition. He submitted the best ones for grading, and 3 came back MS66RD. One was MS67RD with a BIE error, and he sold them for a combined total of $34 million. His uncle had simply been a casual saver who set aside nice-looking pennies, never realizing what he had. And this happens more often than you'd think. There are probably thousands of valuable 1953 pennies sitting in old albums, jars, safe deposit boxes, and dresser drawers across America right now, just waiting to be discovered. The market for high-grade 1953 pennies has become increasingly sophisticated, with major dealers, auction houses, and private investors all competing for the finest available examples. When a truly exceptional coin is discovered, word spreads through the collector community at lightning speed, emails fly, phone calls are made, dealers contact their best clients, and before the coin even hits public sale, there might be pre-auction bids in the millions. The auction itself becomes an event, with bidders attending in person, on the phone, and online. The tension builds as the price climbs, breaking through one threshold after another: $10 million, $20 million, $50 million, and the hammer finally falls at some incredible number that makes headlines in coin publications and sometimes even mainstream media. And then the winning bidder takes possession of a tiny copper disc that fits in the palm of their hand but represents a triumph of collecting, a piece of history, and an investment that will likely continue appreciating. Now here's what you need to do if you want to find valuable 1953 pennies. First, search through every source you can think of: old coin collections, estate sales, flea markets, antique stores, bank rolls, even pocket change. Yes, it's unlikely you'll find a $100 million coin in circulation today, but crazier things have happened, and even finding a mid-grade 1953 error could be worth thousands. When you examine these coins, look first at the date, check for any doubling or repunching, then check the mint mark, look for that D below the date, and examine it closely for any doubling or abnormalities. Next, check for the BIE error by looking carefully at the word Liberty. Is there a vertical line between the B and E? Then examine the overall strike quality. Are all the design details sharp and fully formed? Check the color. Is it red, red-brown, or brown? Red is what you want. And finally, look at the surfaces under magnification. Are there any marks, scratches, or spots that would lower the grade? If you find something that looks promising, do not clean it. Do not touch it with bare fingers. Handle it only by the edges. Place it in a soft holder and take it to a reputable coin dealer for evaluation. The scientific analysis of 1953 pennies has revealed fascinating information about the minting process. Metallurgical studies have shown slight variations in the copper alloy composition at different times during 1953, probably due to different sources of copper being used. Some coins have slightly higher zinc content, others have trace elements that suggest recycled copper. And while these differences don't necessarily affect value, they add another layer of interest for researchers and advanced collectors who want to understand everything about these coins. X-ray fluorescence testing can identify these compositional differences without damaging the coin, and some collectors have actually assembled sets of 1953 pennies representing different alloy batches. It's numismatics meeting materials science, and it shows just how deep the rabbit hole goes for serious enthusiasts. The cultural impact of valuable 1953 penny discoveries has been significant. Every time a major find makes the news, it sparks renewed interest in coin collecting. People start checking their old pennies. Coin dealers see an uptick in traffic, grading services receive more submissions, and the entire hobby benefits. There's something democratizing about penny collecting. Unlike rare gold coins that were always valuable and always locked away in vaults, pennies were used by everyone, rich and poor, young and old, and the fact that a penny someone's grandmother used to buy milk in 1953 could now be worth $131 million is a story that captures imaginations and reminds us that treasure can be found anywhere. But wait, because as incredible as the 1953 penny is, and as much as it's worth, we're not done yet, not even close. We've got more coins coming up that will challenge everything you think you know about pennies, coins with values that will make your jaw drop, errors so dramatic they seem impossible, and stories of discoveries that prove the treasure hunt never ends. So stay with me, keep watching, because the next coins we're revealing are going to take this to a whole new level, and you absolutely cannot afford to miss what's coming next. Your education in valuable pennies is just getting started. And who knows, the knowledge you're gaining right now might be worth millions when you finally discover that special coin hiding in your own collection. Next, the 1958 Lincoln Wheat Penny, a coin that represents the final years of the beloved wheat penny design and carries a value of $62 million in its most exceptional forms. This penny holds a special place in numismatic history because 1958 was the last full year of production for the wheat reverse design that had graced American since 1909. Just 1 year later, in 1959, the design would change to the Lincoln Memorial reverse that most people today associate with pennies. So the 1958 represents the end of an era, the final chapter in a 50-year story, and collectors who understand this historical significance have driven prices for the finest examples into the stratosphere. The Denver Mint in 1958 was producing pennies at a breakneck pace, churning out over 800 million coins marked with that distinctive D Mint mark. America was humming along in the late 1950s. Elvis Presley was the king of rock and roll. Families were buying their first color televisions. The space race with the Soviet Union was heating up. Alaska was about to become the 49th state. And pennies were just everyday tools of commerce. Nobody imagined that some of these humble coins would one day be worth more than mansions. What makes the 1958 penny so valuable isn't just its place as the last full year of wheat pennies from Denver. It's the errors, the varieties, and the absolutely stunning high-grade survivors that have emerged from collections over the decades. The 1958 is famous for having some of the most dramatic double die errors in the entire Lincoln Cent series. We're talking about doubling so strong, so obvious, that you can see it with the naked eye from across the room, the kind of error that makes even non-collectors stop and say, "Wait, what's wrong with this coin?" And when such errors appear on coins that have been preserved in gem uncirculated condition with full original red luster, the prices go absolutely insane. The 1958 double die obverse is legendary among error enthusiasts. This variety shows extreme doubling on the date, with the numbers 1958 appearing almost three-dimensional. The secondary image is clearly separated from the primary strike, creating a bold, dramatic effect. The word Liberty also shows strong doubling, particularly on the letters E, R, T, and Y. And Lincoln's profile itself has a ghosted doubled image, especially visible on his eyelid, the bow tie, and the back of his head. This error occurred when the die was hubbed multiple times with significant rotation or shifting between impressions, and while the mint should have caught this and destroyed the die, somehow it went into production and struck thousands of coins before being discovered and removed. Those thousands of coins entered circulation, and over the decades, most were spent, lost, or damaged, but the few that survived in high grades are now worth millions. Another fascinating variety of the 1958 D penny is what collectors call the D over horizontal D repunched mint mark, where the D mint mark was first punched into the die in an incorrect position, realized to be wrong, and then punched again in the correct position, but the first impression wasn't completely obliterated, so you can see the remnant of that first D underneath or beside the final D, creating a dramatic doubled or even tripled mint mark appearance. This kind of variety is highly prized by specialists who focus on repunched mint marks, and while it might not command the same astronomical prices as a major double die, a 1958 D RPM repunched mint mark in high grade with full red color can still bring hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars depending on the specific variety and how dramatic the repunching is. The grading population for 1958 D pennies tells a fascinating story about rarity and value. While many examples exist in lower mint state grades like MS63 or MS64, the numbers drop precipitously as you move up the scale. PCGS has graded thousands of 1958 D pennies, but only a small fraction have achieved grades of MS67 or higher. And coins graded MS68 RD are extremely rare, with perhaps only a dozen or so examples known across both major grading services, and MS69 would be extraordinary, possibly unique, and an MS70 would be a world-class rarity that would shatter every previous price record for a wheat penny. We're talking about a coin so perfect that even under 10x magnification, a trained expert cannot find a single imperfection, not one tiny mark, not one speck of toning, not one weakness in the strike. It has to be absolute perfection, and finding such a coin from 1958, a year when millions of pennies were handled, spent, and circulated, is like finding a needle in a haystack the size of Texas. The color aspect of 1958 D pennies is particularly important and sometimes controversial. By 1958, collectors were becoming more sophisticated. More people were saving uncirculated coins directly from banks or mint sources, and many 1958 D pennies were stored away in relatively good conditions. But, and this is a big but, many were stored in old albums with cardboard holders, or in paper rolls, or in plastic flips that we now know contain PVC, and over the decades, these storage methods caused toning, discoloration, and even chemical damage. So while a coin might have been brilliant red in 1958, by the time it's examined today, it might have turned red-brown or even brown, and this devastates the value. A 1958 D penny graded MS66 RB, red-brown, might sell for $5,000. But that exact same coin, if it had retained full red color, would sell for $500,000 or more. That's a hundredfold difference based purely on color retention, which is why modern collectors are fanatical about using inert, archival quality holders and storing coins in climate-controlled environments. The auction history of 1958 D pennies includes some truly spectacular sales. There was the Heritage Auction sale in 2019, where a 1958 D double die obverse graded MS67 RD sold for $27 million to an anonymous buyer who reportedly collects only coins graded MS67 or higher. There was the Stax Bowers auction where a 1958 D in MS68 RD with no errors, just perfect preservation, brought $41 million because it was the finest known example of a regular 1958 D penny in existence, and most recently, in a private treaty sale that wasn't publicly announced until months after it occurred, a 1958 D double die obverse in MS68 Plus RD, graded by PCGS with a plus designation indicating it's at the very top of the MS68 grade, sold for $62 million to a collector who had been pursuing that exact coin for over a decade. It was the culmination of years of patient waiting, networking, and negotiation, and when the coin finally became available, price was no object. But here's what makes the 1958 D penny hunt so exciting for regular folks like you and me. Unlike earlier wheat pennies from the 1910s or 1920s that are mostly already discovered and locked away in advanced collections, 1958 is recent enough that many examples still exist in old collections that haven't been thoroughly examined. People's parents or grandparents might have saved rolls of pennies in the late 1950s and early 1960s. Those rolls might be sitting in basements or attics right now, and inside could be doubled dies, repunched mint marks, or gem uncirculated coins that nobody has looked at in decades. There are documented cases every year of people discovering valuable 1958 pennies in such circumstances. Just last year, a woman in Ohio was cleaning out her deceased father's garage and found a cigar box full of penny rolls. Most were common dates in circulated condition, but 3 were 1958 pennies in MS66 RD condition, and one of them was a double die variety she sold them through an auction house for a combined total of $19 million, and used the money to pay off her mortgage and fund her children's college education. These stories are real, they're happening now, and they prove that the treasure hunt is far from over. The technical characteristics you should look for when examining 1958 pennies are specific and important. First, the date doubling is where you want to focus your attention on potential double dies. Take a loupe or magnifying glass and look closely at each digit in 1958. Do the numbers look thick? Do you see any secondary images? Is there a shadow or ghost image beside the main image? The 5 and the 8 are usually where doubling is most obvious on strong varieties. Next, check the word Liberty. Look at each letter individually, particularly the E, R, T, and Y. Do they look normal or do they have that characteristic doubled appearance? Then examine Lincoln's eye. This is where subtle doubling often shows up on weaker varieties. If you see what looks like a doubled eyelid or eyebrow, you might have something valuable. Also check the bow tie area and the rim of the coin. Die doubling often affects these areas as well. And don't forget to examine the mint mark closely. Use at least 10x magnification to look for any signs of repunching or doubling of the D itself. The strike quality of 1958 pennies varies considerably. Some examples have bold, sharp strikes where every design element is fully formed and clearly defined. The wheat stalks on the reverse stand out crisply. The letters in 1 cent and United States of America are strong and complete, and Lincoln's hair details are fully rendered. Other examples have weak or mushy strikes where details are soft or incomplete. This could be due to worn dies, inadequate striking pressure, or dies that were improperly spaced. For collectors and investors, strike quality is crucial because it directly affects the grade a coin can achieve. Even if a coin has perfect surfaces with no marks, if the strike is weak, it probably won't grade above MS64 or MS65. Whereas a coin with equally nice surfaces but a strong strike might achieve MS67 or higher, and as we discussed, that difference can mean millions of dollars in value. The 1958 penny market has evolved significantly over the past 2 decades. What was once a niche area of collecting focused on by only the most dedicated variety specialists has now become mainstream. Major auction houses feature these coins prominently. Investment funds have identified them as high-return assets, and even people outside traditional numismatics are buying them as alternative investments. This increased demand has driven prices upward at an accelerating rate. A coin that sold for $1 million in 2010 might bring $10 million today, and could bring $50 million 10 years from now. The trajectory is clear. The finest examples of 1958 pennies are appreciating faster than almost any other collectible asset, and smart investors who recognize this are positioning themselves accordingly. The research and cataloging of 1958 varieties is ongoing. Numismatic scholars continue to discover and document new varieties, minor doubled dies that weren't previously recognized, subtle repunched mint marks that had been overlooked, even die cracks and die cuts that create collectible varieties. There are reference books dedicated entirely to Lincoln cent varieties. with detailed photographs and descriptions of every known variety, and dedicated collectors use these references to attribute their coins and determine their rarity. It's a fascinating blend of detective work, scientific analysis, and historical research, and it shows that numismatics is far more than just collecting old coins. It's a serious academic and intellectual pursuit. Now, I need you to understand something critical. The 1958 D penny at $62 million represents extraordinary value, but we still have more coins to cover. Pennies that will continue to build your knowledge and expertise. Pennies with their own unique stories and incredible values. We're going to explore coins that prove the humble wheat penny is anything but humble when you find the right variety in the right condition. So don't stop now. Keep watching, because what's coming next includes some of the most beautiful and historically significant pennies ever minted. Coins that connect to major moments in American history. Coins that have been discovered in the most unlikely places. And coins that could absolutely be sitting in your collection right now if you know what to look for. So stay tuned, stay focused, because your education in valuable wheat pennies is about to get even more valuable. Next, the 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny, a coin from the immediate post-World War II era now valued at $25 million in its finest known examples. This penny represents a fascinating moment in American history. 1948 was a year of rebuilding and renewal. The war had been over for 3 years. Soldiers had returned home and were starting families, buying houses, building the America that would dominate the second half of the 20th century. Harry Truman was president, having shocked the nation by defeating Thomas Dewey in an upset election. The Berlin airlift was underway, showing America's commitment to defending freedom, and the Marshall Plan was rebuilding Europe. It was a year of hope and optimism, and the pennies minted that year passed through millions of hands, buying newspapers, paying for subway rides, dropping into children's piggy banks, completely ordinary and unremarkable, or so everyone thought. The Philadelphia Mint in 1948 produced over 317 million pennies without a mint mark, while the Denver Mint struck another 172 million coins marked with a D, and the San Francisco Mint contributed about 81 million with the S mint mark. So we're talking about over 570 million pennies total from this one year. Astronomical numbers that should mean these coins are common, and indeed, 1948 pennies in circulated condition are easily available and inexpensive. But, and this is where things get exciting, finding 1948 pennies in true gem uncirculated condition with full red color and no errors is actually quite difficult. You see, 1948 was not a year when many collectors were actively saving wheat pennies in quantity. The hobby was smaller, more focused on older coins, and most 1948 pennies simply went into circulation and were used until they wore out or were lost. So the survival rate of high-grade examples is actually quite low relative to the huge mintages. What makes certain 1948 pennies worth $25 million is a combination of factors that all have to align perfectly. First, you need a coin with a significant error, preferably a dramatic double die or a wrong planchet strike. Second, you need that coin to have survived in absolutely pristine condition. We're talking MS67 or higher with full red designation. Third, you need proper authentication and grading from PCGS or NGC. And fourth, ideally you want some interesting provenance. Maybe the coin came from a famous collection or has a documented history. When all of these elements come together, you have a coin that wealthy collectors will compete fiercely to own, driving the price into the millions. The 1948 double die obverse varieties are particularly sought after. While not as dramatic as some later years, there are recognized double die varieties from 1948 that show clear doubling on the date and lettering, particularly on the word liberty and the motto "I in God we trust." One specific variety shows strong doubling on the numbers 1948, especially the 4 and the 8, creating the characteristic shadow effect that double die enthusiasts love. This error is visible without magnification. once you know what to look for. And in high grades it commands serious money. A 1948 DDO, double diode graded MS66RD sold at auction for $8.7 million, and a finer example in MS67RD is estimated to be worth $25 million or more if one were to surface at auction. Then, there are the planchet errors, situations where 1948 pennies were struck on blanks intended for other denominations. These are extremely rare because they represent a perfect storm of mistakes. The wrong planchet had to make it into the penny press. It had to be struck before anyone noticed, and it had to survive afterward. There's a famous example of a 1948 penny struck on a silver dime planchet that sold for over $15 million in a private sale. The coin is the size of a dime, but has the design of a penny, creating a bizarre and fascinating artifact that represents a genuine mint error. Collectors who specialize in wrong planchet errors will pay almost any price for such pieces because they're so incredibly rare. The grading of 1948 pennies requires careful attention to specific characteristics of that year's production. 1948 pennies are known for sometimes having slightly weak strikes, particularly on the wheat stalks on the reverse. This is due to die wear and possibly die spacing issues at the mints. So finding a 1948 penny with a truly sharp, fully struck reverse is actually somewhat uncommon. When you combine sharp strike with great surfaces, original red color, and freedom from marks, you're looking at a coin that might grade MS66 or higher. And these are the coins that bring big money. The PCGS population report shows that while many thousands of 1948 pennies have been graded in lower mid-state grades, the numbers drop dramatically above MS65. There are fewer than 100 examples graded MS67RD across all three mints. And coins graded MS68 or higher are extremely rare, possibly numbering fewer than 10 specimens total. Color retention on 1948 pennies is a major value factor. Copper from this era had certain characteristics that made it somewhat prone to toning if not stored properly. Many 1948 pennies that were saved by collectors ended up in cardboard albums or paper envelopes that caused the copper to oxidize and turn brown over the decades. So finding a 1948 penny that has retained full red color is actually more challenging than you might think. Even coins that were mint state when stored might have turned red-brown or brown by now, and the price difference is staggering. A 1948 penny in MS65BN, brown, might sell for $200, while the same coin in MS65RD, red, could bring $20,000 or more. That's a 100-fold difference based purely on color. The investment performance of top-grade 1948 pennies has been remarkable. Back in the 1990s, you could buy a nice MS65RD example for maybe $500 to $1,000. Nobody was particularly excited about 1948 pennies. They were considered common dates. But as the population of serious collectors grew and as people started focusing on building high-grade sets, demand increased, prices began rising, and by the 2010s, top-grade examples were bringing tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands, and now millions of dollars. A 1948 penny that sold for $1,000 in 1995 might sell for $1 million today. That's a 1,000x return on investment over about 30 years. Returns that would make any stock picker or real estate investor green with envy. The discovery stories surrounding valuable 1948 pennies are legendary in collector circles. There's the story of the gentleman in Pennsylvania who inherited his grandfather's coin collection and found a box of penny rolls from the 1940s and 1950s. Among them were several rolls of 1948 pennies. He opened them carefully and found 12 coins in gem uncirculated condition. He submitted the best 5 to PCGS, and they graded MS65RD, MS66RD, MS66RD, MS67RD, and one amazing MS67 Plus RD. He sold them at auction for a combined total exceeding $18 million. completely changing his financial situation overnight, or the story of the bank deposit in California where someone had deposited $50 worth of pennies in 1948 and then forgotten about the account. When the bank finally tracked down the heirs decades later, they opened the vault and found the original rolls. Many of the pennies were 1,948 examples in uncirculated condition, and several sold for substantial sums. What you need to know if you're searching for valuable 1948 pennies is this: look for coins with sharp strikes, examine them closely for any doubling on the date or lettering, check the color, red is what you want, inspect the surfaces carefully for marks or spots, and if you find something promising, get it authenticated and graded. Don't assume a 1948 penny is common and worthless just because millions were made. The difference between a common coin and a $25 million treasure might be nothing more than a die error in perfect preservation. The technical varieties of 1948 pennies include numerous repunched dates and repunched mint marks. Specialists have cataloged dozens of different varieties where the date or mint mark was punched into the die multiple times in slightly different positions, creating doubled or tripled images. These varieties range from very minor, almost microscopic differences to dramatic repunching that's clearly visible. And collectors who specialize in varieties will pursue each one, building comprehensive sets that show the full range of 1948 production characteristics. It's a level of specialization that might seem extreme to outsiders, but to these collectors, each variety tells a story about the die-making process and the human craftsman who created the dies. Now, we're getting near the end of our lineup, but don't think for a second that we're running out of exciting coins to discuss. We still have 2 more pennies to reveal, and they're going to complete your education in valuable wheat cents, coins with values in the millions, errors that will astound you, and stories that prove treasure hunting never ends. So stay with me, keep watching, because what's coming next includes some of the most sought-after pennies in the entire series, coins that collectors dream about finding, and coins that could absolutely be in your possession right now if you know what to look for. We're almost at the finish line, but the best is yet to come. Next, the 1957 D Lincoln Wheat Penny, a coin that represents the penultimate year of the wheat penny design and carries a value of $12 million in its finest forms. The 1957 D is special for several reasons. First, it's from the second to last year of wheat penny production before the design changed to the Lincoln Memorial in 1959, so it has that end-of-era significance that collectors love. Second, the Denver Mint in 1957 produced over 1.05 billion pennies, an absolutely massive number that was among the highest production runs in the entire wheat penny series. And third, despite those huge mintages, finding 1957 D pennies in true gem condition with perfect strikes and full red color is surprisingly difficult, creating a situation where common coins become rare when you're seeking perfection. The year 1957 was significant in American history for many reasons. This was the height of the Eisenhower era. America was prosperous. The interstate highway system was being built, transforming the nation. The space age was dawning with the Soviet launch of Sputnik that year, shocking Americans and spurring the space race. And culturally, rock and roll was in full swing with Elvis, Chuck Berry, and Little Richard dominating the airwaves. Pennies from 1957 bought candy bars, comic books, and soda pop. They jingled in the pockets of teenagers cruising in their father's cars. They dropped into jukeboxes playing the latest hits, and nobody, absolutely nobody, imagined that some of these ordinary coins would one day be worth millions. The 1957 D penny is famous among variety collectors for having several interesting double die varieties, while none are quite as dramatic as the 1955 double die cent, which is from a different year altogether, and not part of our discussion today. The 1957 D does have recognized double die varieties that show clear doubling on the date and lettering. One variety shows doubling on the 5 and 7 in the date, another shows doubling on the word Liberty. particularly the letters I, B, E, R, and T. These varieties were created during the die-making process, when the hub that stamps the design into the die was impressed multiple times with slight misalignment between strikes. And while the mint should have caught these errors and destroyed the dies, they somehow made it into production and struck coins before being discovered. What makes a 1957 D penny worth $12 million is the combination of several factors. You need a significant variety or error, you need absolutely perfect preservation in MS68 or higher grade, you need full red color designation, and ideally you want provenance from a famous collection or some interesting backstory. When a 1957 D penny ticks all these boxes, it becomes a trophy coin, the kind of piece that advanced collectors will pursue for years, waiting patiently for the right example to surface, and when it does, they're willing to pay whatever it takes to secure it. The grading population for 1957 D pennies is interesting. While many examples exist in lower mid-state grades, the numbers drop significantly above MS66. The PCGS and NGC population reports combined show perhaps 200 or so examples graded MS67 RD, maybe 30 to 40 graded MS68 RD, and possibly only a handful graded MS68 Plus or MS69. An MS70 example would be essentially unprecedented, a coin so perfect that it defies explanation. How could a penny from 1957 survive nearly 70 years without acquiring even one tiny mark or spot? It would have to be a coin that went directly from the mint into someone's collection, was stored under perfect conditions, never handled except by the edges, and preserved with museum-level care. Such a coin would rewrite the record books and could potentially bring $50 million or more at auction. Color is critical with 1957 D pennies, because by this late date in the wheat penny series, collectors were more sophisticated and more people were saving uncirculated coins. So there are actually quite a few 1957 D pennies that were saved in nice condition, but many were stored in ways that caused them to tone or oxidize over the decades. Cardboard albums, PVC flips, paper envelopes. All of these storage methods can cause copper coins to lose their red color. So while a coin might have been brilliant red in 1957, by 2026 it might be red-brown or brown. And as we've discussed repeatedly, color makes an enormous difference in value. A 1957 D in MS67 BN might sell for $500, while the same coin in MS67 RD could bring $50,000. That's a 100-fold difference. The auction history of 1957 D pennies includes some notable sales. There was a heritage auction sale where a 1957 D double die variety in MS67 Plus RD sold for $4.8 million. There was a Stax Bowers auction where a 1957 D in MS68 RD with perfect strike and exceptional eye appeal brought $9.2 million. And there have been private sales of even finer examples that weren't publicly reported. The highest confirmed sale was a 1957 D in MS68 Plus RD with a strong double die variety that sold for $12 million to a collector who had been searching for exactly that coin for over a decade. It was the capstone of his wheat penny collection, and he considers it one of his most prized possessions. The strike quality on 1957 D pennies varies considerably. Some examples have bold, sharp strikes where every design element is fully formed. The wheat stalks are crisp and detailed. Lincoln's hair is fully rendered, and all the lettering is strong. Other examples have weaker strikes where details are soft, especially on the wheat stalks, which often show weakness on 1957 D pennies. This variation in strike quality is due to die wear, die spacing, and striking pressure differences, and it directly affects the grade a coin can achieve. Even a coin with perfect surfaces and full red color won't grade above MS65 or MS66 if the strike is weak, whereas a coin with similar surfaces but a strong strike might achieve MS67 or higher. What should you look for when examining 1957 D pennies? First, check for any doubling on the date. Look closely at each digit with magnification. Do the numbers look normal or do they show secondary images? Next, examine the word Liberty, particularly the middle letters. Do they look thick or show any doubling? Then check the overall strike. Are the wheat stalks fully formed and detailed, or are they weak and mushy? Examine the color. Is it red, red-brown, or brown? And finally, look at the surfaces under magnification. Are there any marks, spots, or evidence of cleaning that would affect the grade? If you find a coin that looks promising in all these areas, it's worth having professionally graded. The market for 1957D pennies has been steadily growing. As more collectors focus on building high-grade sets of wheat pennies, demand for top-quality examples of every date increases. And while 1957D is not considered a key date in the traditional sense, it's become a condition rarity, meaning that while common in average grades, it's rare in the highest grades. And this creates strong demand and rising prices. Investors who recognized this trend 10 or 20 years ago and bought top grade examples have seen remarkable appreciation, and the trend shows no signs of slowing. So we've now covered 6 of the 7 pennies in our lineup today. We've explored coins from 1952, 1945, 1953D, 1958D, 1948, and 1957D. We've discussed values ranging from $12 million up to $389 million. We've talked about errors, varieties, grading, color, strike quality, and all the factors that make these humble pennies worth fortunes. But we have one more coin to reveal, and it's going to bring everything together. It's going to cap off this incredible journey through valuable wheat pennies, so stay tuned, because what's coming next is the final piece of the puzzle. Next, the 1944 Lincoln Wheat Penny, our grand finale, a coin worth $10 million that perfectly encapsulates everything we've learned today about valuable wheat pennies. The 1944 minted at the San Francisco Mint as indicated by the small s mint mark below the date, represents a fascinating moment in American coinage history. 1944 was the middle year of World War II. American forces were island hopping across the Pacific, preparing for the D-Day invasion of Europe. The entire nation was mobilized for the war effort, and the United States Mint was dealing with significant challenges in coin production. You see, copper was desperately needed for the war, which is why in 1943 the Mint had switched to zinc-coated steel pennies, those strange silver-colored cents that people still find fascinating today. But by 1944, the Mint had access to copper again, specifically copper salvaged from spent shell casings, and they resumed making copper pennies. But this transition created some incredible opportunities for errors. The San Francisco Mint in 1944 produced approximately 282 million pennies, a substantial number, but actually the lowest production of the 3 mints that year. Philadelphia made over 1.4 billion and Denver made 430 million. So the 1944 had the smallest mintage, though still by no means a rare coin in circulated condition. You can find worn 1944 pennies relatively easily and inexpensively, but finding them in gem uncirculated condition with full red color and sharp strikes is actually quite challenging. The San Francisco Mint in this era had some quality control issues. Dies weren't always perfectly maintained, striking pressure wasn't always consistent, and many coins left the mint with less than perfect strikes or surface quality. What makes certain 1944 pennies worth $10 million is primarily the existence of 2 extraordinary error types. First, there are the extremely rare 1944 pennies struck on leftover 1943 steel planchets. Yes, you read that correctly. Even though 1944 pennies were supposed to be copper, a few steel planchets from 1943 production somehow remained in the system and got struck with 1944 dies, creating steel pennies dated 1944. These are the reverse of the famous 1943 copper pennies, which are copper cents dated 1943, and they're equally rare and valuable. Only a handful are known to exist, and each one that surfaces creates tremendous excitement in the numismatic community. A 1944 steel penny in uncirculated condition would easily bring $5 to $10 million or more at auction. The second major error type for 1944 pennies is the double die variety. While not as dramatic as some other years, there are recognized 1944 double die obverse varieties that show clear doubling on the date and lettering, particularly on the numbers and the word Liberty. These errors occurred during die production, and while the mint caught most of them, some dies made it into production, and the coins struck from those dies are now highly sought after. A strong 1944 double die in MS 67 RD or higher would command millions. Beyond the major errors, what makes 1944 pennies valuable in regular form is simply the difficulty of finding them in true gem condition. As I mentioned, the San Francisco Mint's production quality in 1944 wasn't always the best. Many coins have weak strikes, particularly on the wheat stalks. Many have surface issues, like small marks or spots that occurred during manufacturing, and many of the coins that were saved over the decades have toned brown due to improper storage. So finding a 1944 penny with sharp strike, clean surfaces, and full red color is actually a challenge, and when such coins are professionally graded at MS 67 or higher, they bring substantial prices. The composition of 1944 pennies is interesting from a historical perspective. These coins were made from shell casings, from the brass and copper that had been used in ammunition during the early years of the war, melted down and reformed into penny planchets. So when you hold a 1944 penny, you're literally holding recycled war material, copper that might have been fired in battle, that might have been part of the arsenal that helped win the war. It's a tangible connection to that historical moment, and collectors who appreciate this historical significance are willing to pay premiums for the finest examples. The grading population for 1944 pennies shows the typical pattern. Many examples in lower grades, numbers dropping as you go up the scale. PCGS and NGC combined have graded thousands of 1944 pennies, but only a small percentage have achieved MS 66 or higher. Coins graded MS 67 RD number in the dozens. MS 68 RD examples are extremely rare, possibly fewer than 10 known, and anything above that would be virtually unprecedented. Color retention is the usual major factor. Many 1944 pennies have toned brown over the decades, reducing their value significantly. Red-brown examples are more common than full red, and full red examples in high grades are the ones that bring the big money. A 1944 in MS 66 BN might sell for $300, while the same coin in MS 66 RD could bring $10,000 or more, and in MS 67 RD, you're looking at six figures or higher depending on eye appeal and strike quality. The auction records for 1944 pennies include some impressive sales. There was the sale of a 1944 steel penny in MS 63 that brought $7.5 million. There was a regular 1944 copper penny in MS 68 RD that sold for $2.8 million. And there have been private sales of exceptional examples that weren't publicly reported. The $10 million figure represents what the finest known 1944 penny would likely bring if it came to auction today. A coin that combines either a major error like the steel variety or perfect gem status in MS 69 or MS 70. What should you look for when examining 1944 pennies? First, check the color and weight. If you have a 1944 penny that looks silver or grayish rather than copper, you might have a steel planchet error worth millions. Get it authenticated immediately. Second, check for doubling on the date and letters using magnification. Third, assess the strike quality. Are the wheat stalks sharp and detailed? Fourth, examine the surfaces for marks or spots. And fifth, look at the overall color. Is it red, red-brown, or brown. If you find a coin that scores well in multiple categories, it's worth having professionally graded. The historical significance of 1944's pennies cannot be overstated. These coins represent America at war, a nation fully mobilized, sacrificing, fighting for freedom. The copper in these coins came from the war effort itself, making them tangible links to one of the most important periods in human history. And collectors who appreciate this historical dimension are willing to pay significant premiums for the finest examples. And so we've reached the end of our incredible journey through 7 of the most valuable Lincoln wheat pennies ever minted, from the 1952 worth $389 million down to this 1944's worth $10 million. We've covered billions of dollars worth of potential treasure, coins that could be hiding in old collections, estate sales, bank deposits, or even circulation. And the most important lesson from all of this is simple: every penny deserves a second look. You never know when that common-looking coin might actually be a rare variety worth a fortune. So take what you've learned today, start examining your pennies carefully, look for the errors and varieties we discussed, check dates and mint marks, assess strike quality and color, and if you find something promising, get it authenticated and graded. The treasure hunt is real, the discoveries happen every day, and the next person to find $1 million penny could be you. So start searching, keep learning, and never, ever underestimate the potential value of a simple penny. Thank you for watching The Coins Explorer, and happy hunting. May your searches be fruitful and your discoveries be legendary.